welcome everybody to Haymarket House. We are really excited to have Brian Jones here to talk about his fresh off the press book, the Tuskegee Student Uprising, which is amazing. You can get your copy from Casey in the back. Brian will sign copies afterwards, and we'll hang out and have a little reception afterwards as well. For those who don't know, Brian is a longtime educator who's played many roles in education, both from being a classroom teacher to working at the Schomburg Center, and currently, I want to get your title correct, is the director of New York Public Library Center for Educators and Schools, which is awesome. You could have nobody better in charge. We only wish you were here in Chicago. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who will introduce our other speakers and facilitate the conversation. And just so folks are aware, if you weren't already, we are recording this. It's not being live streamed, but we are recording it because it's going to be such a fabulous conversation. We want folks who couldn't make it in person to be able to watch it. So welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So let me just stand. I want to say a few things. It's really great to be here at Haymarket House, and it's actually appropriate. The more I think about that, this is my very first book event and my very first book, and of all places to first stand up in front of people and talk about it, it actually makes a lot of sense that I'm doing so right here at this place. And so I just want to tell you a little bit why. First, of course, thank you to Haymarket House, especially to Dana for arranging this tonight. And thank you to Jen Johnson and Elizabeth Todd-Breland, who I'm going to bring up in a minute, who graciously agreed to read through the book and talk with me about it. But here's the story, and it's really the origin story of the book, and it has to do with a leader, a Black education leader that we lost here too soon, Karen Lewis, which is that the origin story of this book is the struggle to defend and improve public education that I was a part of as an elementary school teacher in Harlem. And in that struggle, we fought so many battles against privatization, against high-stakes standardized testing, and we lost a lot of battles. But one of the things I tried to do in that struggle was figure out how to use the union as a weapon of that struggle. And so we really learned a lot from the caucus, rank and file educators here in the Chicago Teachers Union. We were so inspired by Karen Lewis. And Karen came to New York and met with us and spent time with us and inspired us and made us feel like we could change the world. I'm deeply grateful to her and to that experience. And in the course of that experience, I tried to also write about it. And it was Haymarket Books who put out a book where it was going to be all teachers contributing to the book. And they said, why don't you write a Black history chapter for that book? It was Education and Capitalism, Struggles for Learning and Liberation, right? And I didn't know anything about Black history and education, so I tried to get a pile of books and ask for recommendations and whatever. I learned, as one does. But then I saw this incredible resonance between the struggle I was living through in Harlem and the history I was reading. That there had been this way in which the education of Black youth had figured centrally in the plans of, frankly, philanthropic elites who wanted to restructure everything. And then, after the Civil War, as now, they put Black education at the center of their plans. Isn't that curious and interesting? So I just kind of noted that, and the place that seemed to be the foundation stone for how it was gonna be after the Civil War, once they overthrew radical Reconstruction, where did they set it up? Tuskegee. And my dad went there. So when I'm reading about Tuskegee, I'm just if you read all the books about Tuskegee, which I did, I think you'll agree with me that there's a pattern. And the pattern is, there's just so much student protest. They write about it constantly. Booker T writes about it. Parents, faculty, and students. They petition, they argue, they push back, they even go on strike. And I thought, oh my God, that's the thing. you know, I went to go get a PhD. It's like, you need data, you need it. I was like, that's it. The student strike of 1903 at Tuskegee. Like, that's what the book is going to be. My dad, who is not a radical, very conservative, but you know, he's interested, curious. He's like, let's take a road trip. So we went together to Tuskegee to find that 1903 student strike. And he was gonna like help me. And so we're there together. We've got the gloves on. They're turning the pages. I've never been in an archive before. We're doing it together, you know, we're turning the pages. And we found like, you know, maybe 3 documents. And I could have like burst into tears because we just driven to Alabama. And like I'm not gonna graduate. It's over for me. It's over. It's a great idea, but it's over. And it was one of the librarians working there who said, kind of like took pity on me and said, well, you know, if you're interested in students, student activism, I think I got something for you. And she goes into the back and pulls out this giant leather-bound volume, years and years and years, bound together in a giant leather book, the student newspaper from the 1960s. Puts it on the table. So my dad graduated in 61, so he really missed all of this. He didn't know any of this either. We're flipping through the book. Through the newspaper, and there it is. The students are getting involved in the civil rights movement. The students are going to Selma. The students are going to Lowndes County, Alabama. The students are going out into the world. They're being terrorized. They're fighting for democracy in the Black Belt. Turn the page. Student is murdered in an off-campus incident. Turn the page. Students riot and blame the school for being accommodations. Blame it for its Booker T. Washingtonism. Turn the page. They formulate a plan to transform it into a black university. Turn the page. They take the Board of Trustees hostage. The state of Alabama sends the National Guard, the Alabama National Guard to the campus. And it's just like, what? At the foundation stone of a conservative plan for black education that resonates all through the present, we see this explosive student movement. And then it's one of those things where like once you get obsessed with a topic, you see your topic everywhere. Right. Everything is your topic. But it kind of was everywhere. It's Tuskegee, it's everywhere. You know, there's like that book that Charles Hamilton and Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture wrote called Black Power, where they laid out in a whole book, like what is the Black Power movement? There's a whole chapter on Tuskegee. It's everywhere. And it's like we forget, but at the time, because Booker T built that, he built it as a capital of Black America. And just like that's the way it happens, like Detroit becomes Motown. You know, like they concentrate wealth and power in these centers, and then people do something with it when they show up. And sometimes it becomes centers of opposition and centers, like that's the way it goes actually. Sometimes these things go together. And they went together in Tuskegee in this way that's really surprising, I think, to a modern audience. So anyway, weirdly, so as an elementary school teacher, like trying to figure out what was happening to me in Harlem, I ended up getting obsessed with Tuskegee, which led me to the archives, which led me to this whole story of the Tuskegee Student Uprising. And so that's why it actually makes sense to be here in Chicago, where so much of the leadership where there's been renewed waves of, especially Black leadership, fighting for justice in education, and where people like Elizabeth Todd-Breland, who wrote the book on Black leadership and activism in education in Chicago, and Jen Johnson, who is a Black leader in education today fighting for justice, that I'm here and really grateful to them to be in dialogue with them. So let me make sure I get their information correct. Jen Johnson is the Chief of Staff of the Chicago Teachers Union, as I think you all know. And Elizabeth Todd-Breland is Associate Professor of History at the University of Illinois at Chicago and author of A Political Education, Black Politics and Education Reform in Chicago since the 1960s. Come on, thank you. Okay. Jen? Okay.
Well, that was fantastic. And you can tell know you're a teacher. Because let me tell you, the delivery, fabulous. So you also just like,
Yeah.
okay, we're just gonna talk. This is what we did in our little prep, and this is what we're gonna do now. And I just wanna start by saying, I love this book,
Right.
and the first way that I encountered your work was through the chapter in Education and Capitalism.
Yeah.
And I've taught that chapter in courses on the history of race and education, and students love it, and it does so much work. And so I really thank you for that. But thank you for this. And this is an incredibly teachable book. And one of the things I was saying when we were just talking now is like, and to your point, you can tell the story of the history of Black education, of the civil rights movement, of the Black Power movement, of ongoing debates amongst Black intellectuals, of what does it mean for a middle class to be at the vanguard, of what are like these class tensions within this place, all through this story, right? And that was kind of amazing because as you mentioned, you know, the things I know about Tuskegee are the things you said. Booker T. Washington, you know, accommodationism versus what else, you know, you think of it as a conservative place, right? And those stories aren't there. So I don't know, there's so much I'm watching. I mean, even the other story that was so fascinating and I think resonates today is one, the murder of Sammy Young that you talk about and the way that that catalyzed the young people on the campus. But also, I mean, talk about like the limits of representational politics. When the young people on campus are pushing for and advocating for the first Black sheriff, and he becomes sheriff, and then he doesn't deliver. He's like, wait, yeah, you might have put me here, but I'm not here for you. And so I don't know, there's so many like questions I have, but one of them, I mean, also how can we be a Haymarket not talk about class? So I want you to talk some about class and how you, I mean, your analysis was so sharp on that point, and also what it meant to be, what Tuskegee the town was in terms of class, and also just your thoughts on sort of the spaces and understandings of Black representational politics and its limits that you tease out here.
Thank you for all of that. That's really interesting. So the first thing is class. And, you know, I'm coming from New York, going to Alabama. My entree to talk to, I talked to 21 people to get this story. You know, it's not my story, it's their story. I'm telling them their story. And my entree is like, my dad went to Tuskegee. And they're like, okay, cool. But, you know, I'm coming from New York. I don't sound like I'm from Alabama. You know, although they joke that I look just like Sammy Young. Because, yeah, he's very pale and he had blue eyes. I don't have blue eyes. But anyway, they really, over and over again, people really impressed on me. It's one of those things where, like, after you interview a bunch of people you kind of step back from, you're like, wow, they all said that. And you didn't realize it at the time, but they all said about the class nature of this town, which is different because it's in the middle of the Black Belt. It's like people are poor, but not there. There, like my dad grew up in a very like working class. He had never seen things that he saw when he got to Tuskegee. He had never seen people like a swimming pool in their backyard and stuff like that. And people who like, you know, never lock their doors and go on European vacations and send their kids to boarding schools and have private automobiles. It is, I was trying to get the like, go through the census and try to figure out if this is true, but it seems to be that it's up there, if not the largest at the time, mid-20th century concentration of Black professionals in the nation. It was like more than 2,000 because you have the hospital, the Veterans Hospital, you have the pilot training program. Those are all professionals, not just the pilots, the people training, the people doing the fixing the planes, repairing the planes, all professionals, very highly skilled. Then you have the professors. So this is like a huge Black professional community concentrated in one place. And for a long time, they're not allowed to vote either. You know, they try to go vote, and there's like so many hurdles and obstacles. One guy jokes like, oh, I had to sit for my German orals longer than I sat for this like, you know, literacy test to be able to vote. Like there's a very, very professional class. So that shapes the way they fought because of who they were and how they saw themselves. And the students were that too, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them came from that as well. And so that's part of what they're both also rebelling against, is seeing that like, but it's also what gives them confidence and like a sense of like, oh, of course we're gonna win, like, of course. We can do this, of course, we can change everything. And then they go out into the rural community and they're like, whoa, and they learn. And they learn, and people report about how much they learned from the rural people once they had like contact with people, because those people were not like, meek, they were fighting. That's how they met them. They met them when they were standing up for themselves in the midst of the SNCC campaigns for democracy, when they're forming the first Black Panther Party. That's how they met the rural people. So they didn't meet them as like meek, people. They met them as people who standing up for themselves, heroic people who, some of whom, they stayed with a family, and the father of the family just disappeared, because he got involved in the movement and stuff. So they were hearing these stories, they were meeting the people. So that was also radicalizing. But the class thing never went away, and it's also, I don't think this made it into the book, but some of them shared the feeling of like, well, that's part of the limitations of our movement, was that like, it couldn't broaden beyond a certain point because of who we were.
Yeah, I mean, you spent a lot of time kind of talking about how the revolutionary context, right, was really helpful to the students in having their demands ultimately met. But there was a conservatism embedded in their demands, that they were very kind of perfunctory, programmatic, things we still fight for today. And it was making me think about my father's experience. He's from Birmingham, Alabama. We visited Tuskegee when I was a little kid. Went and saw, I was telling you guys, the banister being really low because Booker T. Washington was very short. Also light-skinned, light-colored eyes. But so my father was a part of the Black Student Organization at Kalamazoo College, so a predominantly white institution. And in some ways, that created a radical space because there was such a limited population of Black students to draw from. Choke Lumumba went to Kalamazoo College, my dad was with him, and they were this small, intimate group of individuals pushing their administration. So I think, can you talk a little bit about deeper into this idea of radicalism in the Black context of being in the South, not just the class structure of Tuskegee itself, but having the panoply of Black student experience, even if there is a tinge towards the middle class, meant there was not necessarily unanimity in radical demands. Radicalism shifts, radicalism pulls. The death of Martin Luther King plays a prominent role in really escalating the takeover on campus. But say a little bit more about the context and its contribution to what was and what wasn't radical about what the students were asking for.
Right, yeah, that's a really deep question. I don't know if I have a good answer, to be honest with you, because in some ways what I want to say is that you're right that the demands weren't radical. And like, well, what is a radical demand? Like sometimes it's just who's demanding it. That makes it radical. It's like, oh, we want a bathroom break. It's not like a big radical demand, but it's like the fact that no, we're going to decide what it is. It's the changed power dynamic of like, if we have enough power to now win that bathroom break, that is what's radical, not the specific demand. So anyway, because the student demands really changed dramatically over time. Like I interviewed one person who said he came from a high school where they protested in order to have ROTC.
Right.
Because the white high school had it and we didn't have it, and it's an opportunity. So it's like, well, and then that same guy was like at an anti-Vietnam War rally trying to tear down ROTC. So it's like the demands change. Like what you fight for changes. At one point, it was radical to demand Latin and Greek instruction at Tuskegee because the white power structure was like, no, because that implies equal intelligence of Black students to learn Latin and Greek. So we're not going to let them learn Latin and Greek in the South. But then you come to this era, and it's like Latin and Greek. Like we want to learn Swahili. Like we're going to ban Latin and Greek. So it's like you're ashamed of learning Latin and Greek. So the demand itself is almost like it's totally different in different decades, but it's the fact of the students. And then the other thing of the students making demands, the other thing you're saying about the context is like, I think this is part of what was so interesting is like or to me was so interesting is the way in which there are tensions and the students are fighting and organizing in every decade, but there's also a way in which they feel themselves to be on the same side as the administration. Not just because they're Black, although that's part of it, of course, it's that they're in Alabama, in the Black Belt. And there's a way in which, like, the Klan marches through the campus. You know what I mean? And it's like, there's moments where, like, the president of the college is like, picks up a rifle and tells the ROTC people, okay, you behind this tree. He's like, setting it up so that because here comes the Klan. So there's a way in which, like, people aren't trying to destroy Tuskegee. And it strikes me like if you take another, like, the Berkeley 60s movement, where people are indicting Berkeley as being complicit in the military, like, I don't think there's the same love between the administration and the student movement. It feels to me like there was a kind of deep loyalty and the critical radical, like Michael Wright, who in '68, they tried to kick him out from the school like several times. He throws eggs at the State Department people. He's like the leader of the thing where they take the board of trustees hostage. He joked with me, he's like, I captured a major general. But we're talking on the phone, and he's like, where are you? He thought I was in New York. I was like, I'm actually at Tuskegee. He said, you're at Tuskegee right now? And he was like, in Philadelphia. He's like, Brian, you're on hallowed ground. You're on hallowed ground. Like, he has such reverence for the place. So I was trying to figure out, like, what? Wait, I thought you were the radical. And then he went and organized, like, he went to Birmingham after graduation and became, like, an organizer, a union organizer. And then he went out into, like, a kind of religious turn into, like, liberation theology and other kind of religious movements, which is where he is now. He got a law degree. He went on this whole journey, but I guess the point is that he was one of the most, he was writing about capitalism, he was leading these like radical anti-capitalist study groups through SNCC while a Tuskegee student, and that when I call him up, he says, I'm on hallowed ground. That's...
There's a reference
yes.
to Black institutions, although I think what is also interesting is that you point out the white institutional history of the founding of Tuskegee, which I think is often glossed over. And so there is a reverence, but I kept wondering, like, what do we owe these institutions that were ultimately architecturally designed, not literally, but like figuratively by white people to stifle our education? And so this takes the students dragging and pulling the institution along. The reverence, I suppose, is earned by the community. But I certainly think the students who took over the bursar's office up at Northwestern in 1968 probably wouldn't say the same thing about Northwestern. Right.
And that, kind of building on that too, because it's throughout the way you grapple with Booker T. Washington and Washingtonism. And can you speak on that? I mean, I don't know if it felt like this to you, but there's cycles of like the new vocational education, the new, not like the old vocational education for everyone, but actually just them. So I'm curious how, I don't know if you could speak some to your own. It was generative for me because you laid out, here's how other people, and here's how I'm going to enter this conversation. But it plays out across the entire time frame, and I would love for you to talk more about that.
The engineering students.
Listen, the fact that the engineering students were at the vanguard of the movement is not something, in other countries actually, I feel like you see this more, but not in the US, right?
Yeah, it's wild. Like, the people pursuing the most like practical thing that's gonna like get you on the fast track. Yeah, and I guess here's what I still wrestle with about this, because I came into this as like a big critic of Booker T, and there's so much to criticize about Booker T, and I hesitated speaking on it for all the reasons Du Bois writes about hesitating to critique Booker T, because Booker T was born in slavery, and he's like building his school in Alabama, and Du Bois is born in Massachusetts, and he went to Harvard, so it's like in some ways writing about the student experience was a way for me to get out of that and say, actually, it's not about people like me who are in New York or, children of privilege. My dad went to college, It's about the students. Like, let's look at the student perspective who are there. That's a different angle at which to view Booker T. And from that angle, I think you see pretty consistent challenging of his paradigm. And what's consistent is the way in which they're trying to break out of the frame. There's like a paradigm for education. Here's why you're getting this education. Here are the boundaries and the limits. And what you see is students keep trying to push outside of those boundaries. And that's the problem with the cycles of vocational and what have you. It's like they keep trying to put you in a box. And then when you get curious or interested or just feel empowered, you might want to break out of that box. And suddenly that paradigm's not for you. Laid over all of that is the reason for the box, which is trying to figure out a way to kind of survive in a white supremacist
capitalist
country. But here's the other point, though, about the engineering students, is that what is school? And what is it really? Okay? It really is two things, I think. It is really a means to an end. It is like, you gotta get that paper, because you're trying to survive, and that just keeps getting more and more true, that you have to get even more paper. Okay? So there's like a very practical, frankly, speaking of practical, there's a practical element to like why people are in school, anywhere that you see them in school. Very practical. But once you show up there, and you kind of like sit back in your chair, and okay, now we're talking about stuff, and okay, what do I read? Okay, what's the assignment? You kind of look around, well, you might start getting some ideas. Because like once you can read anything. And if we have a little space to talk, well, can I say how it really is? Can I raise my hand and say something real? Like is that space allowed? And then you maybe get a little confidence. You might start demanding that space. And so people, we do wrong when they try to strip, and this is what the charter thing is too. It's like we're going to just strip it down to the like skills you need, and we're just so that you can bootstrap it. But this is purely like getting your test scores up endeavor. That is what this is. And they miss the like bigger ambition, questions of justice, that this is a place to think and to look critically at your society and try to strip all that away. But look, you gotta have both things, or the institution doesn't survive. Like if you strip away the usefulness of it and the practicality, and it's just a place of dreaming, then it's like it loses some of its energy. You know what I mean? So it's like both things. And what's so interesting to me about these student movements, especially at Tuskegee, is the way those two interests get fused in the slogan, Black Power, Black University. It's not just revolution and social change. It's also financial aid and syllabus on the first day of class, in every class, so I can see what this is. And students on every committee, especially the disciplinary committees. And scholarships for athletes.
That's what I was saying.
And get rid of ROTC, get rid of mandatory church. But if you just had a movement that was like just those demands, it's like, what is that? You know what I mean? Without the revolution, without the social change, without the redistribution, without the questions of justice. That's like, nobody wants to get up in the morning for that. But if you have just that, without the immediate questions facing, it's like the powerful way that these get brought together speaks to like what the institution is to people. It's both things. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're not wrong. I mean, the only reason my father ended up going to Kalamazoo College is because of a football scholarship. And so I think, the way that the students emphasize the need for athletic scholarships and the fact that we're still grappling with that as an avenue to education today in 2022 is deeply disturbing. So it's like, what is it going to take in order to make sports not be such an incredibly important vehicle? I mean, at CTU, we're actually fighting for the expansion of sports programming. We won $25 million in this contract for additional sports. It doesn't even begin to bring equity of sports programming in Chicago public schools. And it doesn't have to just be about scholarships. It's about engaging students at school. Some kids come to school because of art, because of music, because of sports. And so having these programs might connect them to the practical end result that they may need to get ahead in capitalist society. But I thought that was really interesting, the engineering and the athletic scholarships in particular, and the fact that we're still struggling with these issues today.
It also resonates when you were talking about those demands, and this again is 68, right? And here in Chicago in 68, Black high school students were walking out, and some of their demands were very similar, right? Relevant military training, right? They demanded homework, right? So that's homework, right? But it was a recognition that like I am not getting the education that I know I deserve, and this is not adequate. And so that was something that very much stuck out to me as well. And I think also when I see Dave, Snowball, you always talk about the difference between schooling and education. And this was the other thing I think that stood out. And there was a quote, because it was good, where you were talking about the multiple forms of education that students were getting by being at Tuskegee in particular. And I think this, again, something that's there but also other places. And you say, quote, that experience of collective action too becomes a kind of school. In that school, students frequently become teachers and teachers become students. And I think that both spoke to the education that students were getting inside and outside of the classroom, but also faculty. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about faculty here, because in addition to the administration having a particular sort of different orientation towards students, in the earlier periods, it was actually the faculty, right, who was pushing some of these civil rights things, but then some tensions happened. And, but that was an interesting story to me, and not one that I think always aligns in that way.
Yeah, I mean, the faculty became the students in the second phase, that's for sure. But in the first phase, they were the teachers. They stepped forward and broke the mold of Tuskegee and Booker T, and they led this decades-long campaign to win for themselves the right to vote. I mean, it was really serious and persistent, and it ended up being this really important Supreme Court precedent, although it recently, of course, has been overthrown, against the gerrymander, basically, Chameleon versus Lightfoot. And they did it their way. It was very like, we're not rabble-rousers. Anybody can march. Any dumbbell can march. It's one of the quotes that the leader of faculty member said, like, we don't do that. So, they did it their way, and they won. I mean, but because they had, frankly, Montgomery's 30-minute drive away, and it's happening, they want nothing to do with it, but they're benefiting from the fact that these kinds of things are going their way, so they just decide to play the long game in the courts, and they win. And they have the money. They have the money to support all the court challenges and what have you. And they won, they prevailed. And so that gave them a lot of confidence. Like, the faculty were like, we just won in the US Supreme Court. And we're winning. And then their students, I mean, as soon as that happens, that's 1960. That's when the student movement, in 1960, the top of the year, that's when the student movement explodes across the South, and suddenly they are no longer in the leadership. Suddenly their ideas about how to do things are just no longer what everybody bows to. Just because they won this big Supreme Court case, kind of nobody cares all of a sudden, and they're a little shocked by that. And so the students race right ahead of them with some radical faculty going with them, but it leads to a lot of tension for that reason. But the faculty were no slouches, like they did quite a bit. And then the other thing is, frankly, the administration. The administration was really, they also opened the door to the student movement in a lot of ways. They encouraged the students to get off campus and participate, not as like activists in the Black Belt, but they sent them out there to do like a literacy tutoring program. But that's how they met SNP. That's how they met all these rural activists. Like, that's how they got involved. They ended up knee deep in all those campaigns because of this like literacy program funded by the federal government.
So talk a bit more about that, the federal government funding, the fact of the institution being a white institution at the very beginning.
Yeah.
What do you think the implications are?
But this is true of all of higher education, so I can't just pick on Tuskegee. All of higher education became federally funded, like deeply intertwined with the military, with the federal government in the middle of the 20th century. It was a major transformation, it's not just Tuskegee. So just to be clear, like, I'm not picking on Tuskegee, but whereas it was like Carnegie in Booker T's day, who was the one writing the checks, that went away. And now it was Uncle Sam, that veterans hospital. Those were federal salaries. And that's why the segregationist white supremacists were so worried about it. Because they're like, wait a minute, you're gonna have a whole bunch of like professional black people whose paychecks we don't write, whose pay we don't control. That's part of what was so dangerous about having a veterans hospital and a pilot training program. And by the way, the NAACP was opposed to the pilot training program being at Tuskegee. They campaigned against it openly, publicly, because they were worried they were fighting to desegregate the military. If you make, what kind of pilot training is there going to be at Tuskegee? It's going to be segregated pilot training. So what's interesting is now it's like they make movies about the Red Tails, and it's like a thing of pride. And I get it. It's like I'm trying to rain on people's reason of being proud of something, but we just have to remember that actually it was controversial at the time for that reason. So anyway, so the federal government becomes a major subsidizer of Tuskegee, and that means the anti-war movement has different stakes. The State Department comes and students throw eggs at them, and they leave with like yolk all over them. Like, well, wait a minute, that's who's paying the bills here, is Uncle Sam in the military. And so that's like a different kind of a struggle, I think. So that's some of the implications. Like, You're becoming intertwined. You're also intertwined with the national project. The project, whatever the nation is doing abroad, you're implicated in that. And here's another thing that flips, is like the sensibility of like the Peace Corps, or like, we're gonna go be ambassadors of democracy and progress and yada yada. We're gonna go do that especially because we're Black students at this, wealthy, well-resourced school. We're gonna go to Africa. And we're gonna go participate in that and be helpful in Africa. But then, when Africa rises up, it flips, and the idea is like, oh, they are going to come here and teach us, and we're going to learn from Africa, not teach Africa. So they start to read the African revolutionaries, like that becomes part of the reading list, and they're realizing that the kind of who's leading whom is flipping for them, and that's what leads them into a conflict with their government, because the government is not trying to like follow the lead of African national revolutionaries.
I know I'm probably supposed to shift to, I'm asking one, can I do one?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So there's so many things that like just deeply resonate here with our ongoing and continued challenges in the field of education, racism, capitalism. What are the things that you see most starkly speaking to our contemporary moment?
I think there's a way in which the origin point was the way in which Black education became almost like a cloak for privatization and that kind of corporate education reform. Like that was the impetus for this whole going down the radical of like Tuskegee and getting obsessed with that place and that history. But now that a certain wave of that has passed and we're kind of on the other side of it, I think there's a way in which we're still grappling with the meaning of all of that and what is the future for Black educational movements and social movements, and like, what do we call for? And I think we're in a place where there are a lot of different, there's a kind of sorting out process that's going on that I think this history helps us see in retrospect that there was a similar sorting out process. And I guess one thing that I feel, especially when I was working at the Schomburg Center, and I was in this like center of Black learning and different kind of Black political cross currents, was that I think it's helpful to remember and see closely how Black people struggling to organize had a hard time achieving unity of purpose, agreed and shared political ideas. Because it's so tempting to look back with nostalgia. Nostalgia is so powerful. Of like, oh my God, we were all so united back then. We were all on the same page back then. But if that's your view of how we were, then you're totally disarmed to realize, to grapple with how hard it is to find a common purpose and pull people together on a common project in the present. Whereas if you see how hard it was back then maybe you'll feel more like, oh, it was human beings who achieved what they achieved back then, like me, facing similar problems that I faced, not making it easy. For example, like when Martin Luther King was like breaking the mold in Montgomery, somebody from Tuskegee invited him to speak. They wouldn't let him on campus. Okay? They wouldn't let him on the campus. He spoke at a church off campus. One professor from campus showed up, Charles Hamilton, and then he got fired. So it's like, sometimes it's helpful to remember, I think, that as we're kind of sorting out who stands where, who is for what, like, we shouldn't be shocked that we're not going to all agree all the time.
The only, I think, lingering piece for me is the generational divide today. And, I feel like as people who study history, there's, I feel old now, I'm like, yeah, these young people, they want stuff so fast, so quick. That's just not how it works. It's very complicated. How does this story maybe help you be informed on what your advice would be to bring people who are never going to all be on the same page about Black education, public education? But what do you think this generational divide can tell us about the way forward? Should we be throwing more eggs in people's faces, occupying more buildings?
there's a way, this whole thing would have played out very differently were it not for one feature of student organizing, which is like people graduate. So in some ways, this is like two stories in the 60s, because that whole first wave of people who learned so much in the course of struggles, going into the black belt, all that kind of stuff, went and all that, then they graduated in like 66. So the new crop in 67, 68, they don't have all that experience. And they come in and they're trying to grab hold of whatever they can grab hold of, but there's like a discontinuity in the student movement. So it's just like, okay, right. It makes me sympathetic towards them. Like, yeah, just because, you want to cheer for you want to cheer for any young people, not just black young people. You want to cheer for young people rising up, trying to take action, trying to but they don't have full information. Like none of us do. Like, they're going to get things wrong. They're going to say something in a way that might be inartful. Like, they're going to make mistakes, not because that they're right all the time. But I think there's something about, you can only learn this by doing it, and you have to do it. And so it was humbling to me, and it made me think back to I was like a student activist, all the things where it's like, that I cringe about that I said and did in such a shrill voice back then. But it's like, that's what you have to do.
Can't let the Washingtonian manners and morals outpace the pride and the activism.
Well, again, Brian, thanks so much for producing a document like this. Right before lockdown, I got a chance to go to Auburn, Alabama, and I did not know that Auburn was 15 minutes away from Tuskegee, right? And Auburn having this kind of plantation history or what happened, and I was wondering if when students were calling for a black university, were they making it was that demand in relationship to where they were geographically, spatially, in relationship to class, and then how did they now start to articulate that with this confluence of the reverence, but also the deep critique of this kind of respectability politic in a place like Tuskegee? I was real curious in terms of that call for a black university amongst all of those things, because when you go to Auburn, you hit this farm, and of course, as the random black dude from Chicago, I'm like, what that used to be? Right? And people will give you that answer, but that thing around really understanding that respectability politic, but also the tension when you are calling for a black university that is instructing and housing black people, right? I mean, let's think about those tensions.
Yeah, I think the answer to your question is that the call for a black university spread throughout all of the HBCUs. It was not specific to Alabama or one location, it spread through all of them. It was a dialogue they were having with each other among the student activists. Some of its first calls got made in like Negro Digest and Jet Magazine, and like they had these articles where they start putting out like, what is this? And what Tuskegee wasn't the first, Tuskegee people weren't the first to articulate it, although Charles Hamilton, former Tuskegee professor was one of the first to articulate this way. And it was very radical critique, less of the kind of loyal deference. I mean, in some ways that comes like later when I'm interviewing people who are in their 60s and 70s. But at the time they are more critique, deep critique of this. Look at the structure, look at who the board of trustees are, we're naming them, look at who's actually in charge, look at who pays the bills. This all has to change. But I guess the loyalty, if you will, comes in the idea that it's not about like we have to burn this thing to the ground. It's like we have to recruit this thing for the revolution. Like we're going to make this a black university, a center of learning for our movement. We're going to take the movement and make this a movement center. And they were already making it a movement center, but they just wanted to make that a more thorough transformation. But there is truth to what you're saying about the geographic thing with Tuskegee in particular, because they had a majority. Because they had a large majority. And that's why it's interesting, like with the Black Panthers as an idea, right, has this origin in Lowndes County, Alabama. That's the symbol of the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. And then people try to export it to New York and to Oakland, and of course the Oakland Party took off and became successful. What was the Oakland Party about? Oh yeah, self-defense from the police. We're protecting ourselves from the police. And isn't it interesting that in Tuskegee, that wasn't what they tried to do. What they tried to do was become the police. We're going to elect, we're going to take over all of these offices. The faculty said, well, we should elect some people. But the black faculty said we shouldn't elect the sheriff. Now, why would they say that? Because they know that that will inflame the white minority. So they campaigned against the first black sheriff. They campaigned against his election. And he's from Tuskegee, he's a Tuskegee student. So that was a moment of bitterness. But the idea now, as you said, that wasn't the sheriff's self, it wasn't like a black power sheriff, that wasn't his self-conception. But it was the movement that put him in there on the conception that this is a decolonial thing. This is we're taking over. This is going to be a geographic solution, and that's why there's a chapter on it in Black Power. Because it's well, what if we took over a geography? What if there was a space that we could liberate and control? And what Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton say is, we could show how to do it in a humane way. We could even show white people, look, this is a humane way to live. That's why we would take over. Not because we're going to try to have black supremacy, but because we're trying to be humane and democratic and yada yada. But we're the majority. So yeah, we should have more seats. Does that answer your question? Okay. Oh, thank you for that. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad to get my hands on this history because I think 68 was such an important year in my life. Here in Chicago. And I think, I knew about the Tuskegee activity in 68, but it got lost in all the other things that were going on in 68. And so, but Tuskegee really does belong as part of the history of 68. And I think that's really glad to get this volume.
Thank you. I just want to tell you another funny story, which is that the very first person I interviewed was somebody who lives in New York, who went to Tuskegee, and the archivist told me about it. His name is Chester Higgins. Now, by the way, if you Google Chester Higgins, you'll see he's a world-famous photographer. He's he was at the New York Times for many years, award-winning. Right now, he's got stuff in galleries all over the United States. He's an amazing photographer, and his passion is photographing the African diaspora. He has a new book out about the origins of world religion along the Nile River called Sacred Nile. It's just a gorgeous book. He learned to take photographs. He took his first photographs in 1968 at Tuskegee. So I go to see him in Brooklyn. His house is filled with all these photography books, all this stuff. I mean, he's an old photographer with just a house a life full of stuff. And he comes and shows me this amazing photograph of a protest. And it's first person I ever interviewed to try to get this story. And he goes, there's your cover. And sure enough, there's your cover. But wait, there's more. So they were talking, and he's a very mild man. He's asking me a few questions. He's let me show you something else. He goes away, he comes back with this bound volume. And it's typed. I open it up, and it's all typed. Like old typewriter typed, but very nicely done. It's a documentary history of the 68 struggle at Tuskegee. Published by the administration, assembled with their assistance. It was his idea to archive it at the time by typing. So it's not the original leaflet, it's the typed version of the leaflet. Every leaflet, every memo, from the administration, from the activists, everything. In 200 pages, with a chronology at the end. And he's that's going to be helpful. So basically, there would be no book without Chester Higgins.
So you're telling me hoarding?
Oh, really? This is how this story works. You'll be talking to someone, and then they'll be like, I have some stuff in my basement. That's how it goes.
He said to me, Brian, I'm so glad you're here. I've been waiting for somebody to come ask about this. I've been waiting. I knew this was a huge story. He knew it at the time. He's like, I better keep all this stuff. He went to the administration, we should keep all this, and they were like, yes. And the president, Luther Foster, his secretary, typed all the documents.
See, that doesn't normally happen when you put Tuskegee in the
Yeah, please.
I just was thinking back to, I forget who was that asked a question about kind of like lessons from them for the day, or, you know, similarities, differences, and so on, and I was just struck by I don't know about this history, I don't know if we were reading the book as well, but struck by the idea of like the Klan marching through campus, and I think it's making me think about the rise of similar kinds of armed movements, and thinking about just that there's a whole bunch of things that are going to happen over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
You know, that it's hard for us to predict the outcome of until we even know, like, yeah, what the outcome of certain elections looks like and so on. But we do know that there's a rising, angry, festering, hard right. And I just wondered what, you know, thinking about how they responded to that kind of provocation and so on, like what does that say about our world? How much does, just thoughts on that kind of stuff.
Well, look, that's why people are sympathetic to Booker T, because like everything you do isn't like a fighting stance. Like sometimes you try to survive, to like live to fight another day. You know what I mean? Now, okay, again, you can still take like Booker T took it to another extreme where he's trying to cut people who are fighting off at the knees, like problematic. But I think that's part of why Booker T-ism survives and why it still has an appeal, because people kind of understand, like, sometimes you have that impulse to, like, keep your head down so it doesn't get chopped off, because there's a lot of people trying to chop off your head around here, especially if you're black, especially if, you know, depending on how you move through this world. So I think there's kind of sympathy for that, and yes, look at what they're trying to do, ban books, ban curriculum. What is that if not the whole history of the institution where, like, everything is censored? Everything is like, you can't be seen doing this, you can't be seen reading that. Like, that's the history of the way they try to constrain this. If anything, this is a history of students trying to break out of those constraints, which, you know, I think we know, like, yeah, you can ban books, sure, you can censor the curriculum, but not forever. Like, eventually people are gonna fight back, and so we're now entering into a phase where this is like, part of the agenda is, in addition to the armed white supremacists, there's the state legislatures, and a majority of them have passed already or are considering legislation to like ban basically black history. So it's like, this is the struggle that we're in a struggle now over curriculum that in some ways echoes the history of like constrained, but they're doing it for all children in whole states. Whereas before it was like, this is what we're going to do to constrain the education of black youth. That might not be the happiest note. But it's real, like that's really what's happening.
I mean, this is a weird tangent, but it's, I promise I'll get back to the point, but it's making me think about like strange bedfellows kind of moments that are in here, but I think also speak to the current moment. I was recently in Alabama for ASALA, Association with the Study of African American Life and History. Carter G. Woods' organization still has an annual conference. And one of the topics there was that they are creating an AP African American History course. And this has been a controversial thing for a number of reasons. I think, you know, what is the AP, College Board, large corporation, chill, we could go on. But a fascinating, again, coming from Chicago, where I'm not necessarily in the same type of struggle for, I just want to teach Black history. A fascinating argument that was made by some of the folks there was like, well, one of the things that we did is that we made the AP have a policy that if they're not going to teach, you know, you can't just say, I'm not going to do AP African American history, then you can't teach any AP. And in places like Ohio and some of these, Indiana, they're like, oh, wait, okay, then we'll go ahead, you can do the AP African American, because we can't keep our APs, right? And it was just I was like, that's bizarre, I still don't know how I feel, but wow, like this is where we are, you know? And they were like, this has become a perhaps unexpected tool in a place where they said you can't teach really Black history anymore. To say, but what if it's AP? You know, like it was just a fascinating, I think again, like weird ways to push back on what fascism looks like.
Right. It's like we're going to struggle over these same things, but we have different resources this time.
That's true.
At many different levels of this society.
And it's a return in many ways to what you're talking about in this book, Brian, because the question is really around who has access, right? So who has access to these things that will not appear to be radical demands, right? But they're demands of basic living, right? But this thing around, because now, when you think about the AP Black Studies curriculum, the thing is always, okay, you get this kind of strange bedfellow arrangement, but just like the Black students in Tuskegee, you gotta make these things around, all right, well, how do folks get in the AP, right? Who can take it, right? Is it accessible to the folks who have been the most dispossessed of it, right? And I see that as a heavy class question in Tuskegee, because like you said, you got all the faces, and Alabama just being an interesting state in that way, right? My mom is from Alabama, so you got Mobile, Montgomery, Birmingham, right, that have these real pockets of Black middle class life, right, that were chosen specifically because of the respectability politics that lived in those spaces. So thinking about that in terms of who has access, and that was a split even in SELC when King came to Montgomery in '55. When they were saying, it was a couple of folks who were saying, well, what about the poor people? Right? These are well-to-do folks, right? What about the poor folk? And that those questions come up, and I hear that same thing kind of in a cellar about AP. It's like, all right, y'all, who has access to this? In terms of the broader question.
Absolutely.
It may be a necessary foothold in some places, but how much energy do you want to put over there?
Yeah.
And I think that the dynamic you're talking about plays out in your book as well. I mean, when you were juxtaposing the demands being made by students with the demands being made by Birmingham steelworkers, right? The claim for a basic quality of life is not a basic claim, right? It is unfortunately in the context, a radical claim.
And, I had this like moment of realizing like, oh, right, Alabama. Of course, like Alabama has this incredible radical history of like, so I went and grabbed Robin D.G. Kelly, Hammer and Hoe off the shelf. And oh boy, there are some stories that make it into this book. And interestingly, they cut both ways. There were moments that Tuskegee is dispatching students to convince the Black workers not to join the union in the mines. And then fast forward a couple years, and you have the administration hosting the Southern Youth Negro Congress. The Communist Party started mass Black student radical organizations, and one of the things they do is organize people into unions, using places like Tuskegee as a launching pad. So it's really like wide-ranging. But yes. Anyway, thank you all. This was great. Let's drink some wine and hang out.
Yes.